Hi, I'm Dr. David Dobson. Welcome to Conversations. Today, my guest is Daria Tsynda. Daria is an undergraduate business student at the University of the Fraser Valley. We will be discussing her group research project, which examines the effects of message framing in election campaigns. Daria has been awarded the University of Toronto Press Award for her work on this project. It's a pleasure to have you on my show, Daria.
Hi, Dr. Dobson. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I am very pleased to be here and I'm excited to share some things about my project.
Daria, before we discuss your project, can you explain what message framing is?
Yes, so I think that the best way to define it is that framing is the way in which opinions about an issue can be altered by emphasizing or de-emphasizing some aspects of it. So basically, in the context of political campaigns, which is what I've been researching, message framing is often used by candidates to shape how people perceive them. So they will often use them in their advertisements to emphasize some issues and then downplay the others. And they also will try to invoke some emotions in their audience to either gain more favor for themselves or disadvantage their opponents. And just to give a quick example so that it's easier to understand it in practice, imagine I am in this ad for a politician and I'm saying, the minister had an affair. Well, okay, that might raise an eyebrow, you might feel a bit off, but then what if I said, the minister was having an affair? Now, this likely produces more strong emotions, right?
Mm,
And all I did here is change the way I said it. So my
mm,
intonation, it was more up and it was more dramatic. I was accenting the word affair and I just changed the tense of the verb. And
mm,
just those small changes already altered the way in which you perceive this message.
mm,
Now imagine there would also be some graphics at play and visuals and all of those things working together to change your perception of an issue. That is, in a nutshell, what message framing is and what it looks like. We say the same thing in a different way, and we get a completely different reaction from people. In my project, I explored how message framing strategies like this can influence voter engagement in Canada specifically, and how we can use those insights to increase voter turnout.
mm. For your project, Daria, you explored how message framing impacts civic engagement during elections. Can you share a little bit about your project?
Yeah, absolutely. So my project was focused on Canadian federal elections, and I was particularly interested in how political messages are framed by major parties such as Liberals, Conservatives, and NDP, and how they affect civic engagement. I was also interested in seeing how educational campaigns, so the ones that are more neutral
Mm,
and just aim to increase voter turnout overall, can be made more effective and increase voter turnout as well. Overall, the big question I was asking for this research was rather practical.
mm,
What kind of message framing actually motivates people to participate in elections? I wanted this to be as practical as possible, so my goal was to identify specific strategies, some key elements that work and key elements that don't work, and then combine it into a guidance for both politicians for crafting their messages and for citizens looking to vote for understanding of the best strategies for increasing the voter engagement. And I think that this research is especially important right now because in Canada, the voter turnout has been on a decline since 1980s, and especially right now when we are amidst the federal election, talking about things like voter engagement are really important because they increase the education, they increase the highlighted importance of engaging in those things, and I really hope that this project sheds some more light on that. So overall, I looked at two types of messaging. First, I looked at persuasion-based messages, which are basically the ones that politicians put out to promote themselves and to sway voters in a certain direction. And then the second type was the education-based. So those are just neutral advertisements that are put out by third parties and that are encouraging voters to go out and cast their vote overall, regardless of their voter preferences. So this matters not only because political messaging shapes how we think about issues, but also because a healthy democracy depends on active participation. So when we understand how messaging works, that can help us design better campaigns which will increase voter turnout. And overall, I see this project as having two purposes. So first of all, it should help political communications craft more effective and responsible messages. And also it would empower the voters themselves for understanding and interpreting the messages better, seeing when they're being manipulated, and making more educated choices overall.
Daria, very interesting project. How did you conduct your research?
So I had a multi-phase approach. I wanted to make sure that I'm utilizing both secondary and primary data. And I started by analyzing existing literature, where we all start. So I wanted to see what work has already been done and hopefully identify some research gaps to position my project in a way that it can be most helpful. And then also to build up on the secondary data that has already been found. So what I found to be the biggest problem with the literature that already exists is that a lot of work is done based on the US data, and then it is just assumed to apply to Canadians as well. And while a lot of findings are certainly similar because we have a similar environment in some aspects, there are still things that are unique to Canadian context, and they have not been taken into account in those studies. For example, a lot of Canadians identify as so-called flexible partisans, which basically means that their party affiliation tends to change throughout their life, and they're not as attached and don't feel as strongly about their party. Taking things like that into account, I felt would be very important and would be able to enhance the research in this aspect specifically for Canadian context. So that is what I set out to do. And also, the literature review helped me understand better what kinds of techniques for message framing are already out there and which techniques politicians are using all the time, so that I could then embed this into my primary research process to see reactions of my participants to different types of message framing. So after I completed this part of work, I moved on to the primary data collection. And I started by conducting a focus group where 10 people participated. So that gave us a pretty good mix of opinions on the issues. And then during the focus group for an hour and 15 minutes, we were discussing different questions regarding the message framing and political messaging, both in persuasion-based and in educational. I also showed them 4 different advertisements from different political parties, and then also one educational advertisement that was neutral and just encouraging people to vote overall. Then I asked them to discuss their opinions on it, how those advertisements made them feel, what different techniques they noticed that have been used, how did they influence them. So a lot of those reflective work. And overall, the focus group gave me a great foundation of the qualitative data. But then I really wanted to strengthen it with some quantitative results to be able to run statistical tests and have those results have more statistical significance. So then I created a survey, which was online, and it basically comprised lots of different examples of political advertisements and had some questions attached to it. So for example, I would present an advertisement and then I would ask people to rate how likely they would be to vote for this party after seeing this advertisement. So things like that. And then of course, gathering some demographic data like age and gender with the consent of participants to be able to draw some connections between those answers. So 100 people filled out this survey, and then I used it combined with the focus group results to analyze and quantify all of my findings. And the really important thing for me here was to connect the findings from the focus group with the survey. So I built what I found in the group into the questions. For example, in our discussion, some of the participants mentioned that they vote for the issues that matter to them, and when they see visuals that relate to the things that they care for, they are more interested. To test that on a bigger scale, I included a question in my survey that had an advertisement presented with children, so heavily targeting parents. And then I correlated the responses to that question, so the ratings that participants gave, to the answer to the question of whether they have kids or not. And as predicted, people who had children consistently rated that ad as much more persuasive. So in this way, I was combining the findings from both sources. And then overall, after that, I was just comprising that all into my report where I highlighted both the findings from the focus group and the survey. And then I gathered some specific insights that could be helpful for both education-based campaigns and persuasion-based ones.
Daria, what did you learn from your study?
So there were a lot of findings that I put into this practical takeaway form, and I formulated them as guidance for professionals who work in political message framing. So first of all, I found that for persuasion-based messaging, specifics are key. The advertisements that mention specific plans and platforms that candidates were running with tend to perform much, much better than the ones that just have general slogans of will be good when you elect me, sort of thing. So a lot of participants noted that when they have the ability to go in and read more about the plans of this person, understand better what this party is planning to do for their community, whether that's a province or a country, they feel much more empowered and they also feel much more trusting. And that adds a lot of credibility to the party and significantly influences their likelihood to gain some voters from those messages. Then also it's very important to use relatable visuals because images that reflect everyday life and something that people can connect to, like their local landmarks, families, places they've been to, community events, those make political messaging much more persuasive because people start to associate themselves with the candidate more. And when they see those visual markers, they perk up and they start paying much more attention and they feel like now they can trust this candidate more because the candidate is immersed into their context. And to quote one of the participants again is, when I vote for the issues that matter to me. So when candidates can really understand what issues they can target for their audience, what is the greatest pains of that audience, they can really gain much more attention to themselves and positive attention at that. So the one that is likely convertible into actual voters later down the line. And then also, it's very important to make criticism constructive. Now, there are a lot of negatively framed messages out there. Majority of the advertisements we see are pretty much negative. Everyone is always targeting someone else. Yeah. And actually, those types of messages received like the worst reactions because people were saying that they feel very emotionally manipulated, they feel like they are being guilt-tripped, and mostly it just gives this party that is putting out those advertisements this view of a bully, as if they're just out there to get the other party no matter what. So the only cue for that everyone indicated to be effective was giving specifics. Basically, any point that the party or candidate is making to criticize the opposition needs to be backed up by data. You're saying they're bad for the community, you need to show how. Have they made the bills more expensive? Have they ruined some buildings? What have they done that actually made them a bad influence for this community? Those things make such claims much more argumented, and they also make people feel, as in this case, they're just getting awareness about the issues of that candidate that they otherwise might have missed, instead of just being manipulated into hating them for no apparent reason. So that is really important. And then, overall, another finding was that avoiding purely negative advertisements can be a real game changer for many campaigns. Because a lot of times, as I mentioned, politicians will concentrate on just negative campaigning. So one advertisement will be very negative and very heavily targeting the other party. However, when I showed participants some examples of advertisements that started off with positive messaging about the party itself, so like talking about what they have done for the community and how they connect to these people and overall how they care for them, and then transitioned into some critique of the opposition, and important here again, constructive critique. So critique where we would see some specific facts and some data to back up the claims. Those type of advertisements performed much better. What people communicated to me was that in this case, they already feel like in the beginning, they have built up some connection to the candidate because they've heard more about what this person has done for the community. So they feel more trusting towards them. They feel like, okay, this person actually cares. They've done these things for us. And then after that, the critique of the opposition is also perceived more favorably because, first of all, it creates this nice contrast between here's what good we've done and here's
mm,
what bad they've done, sort of
mm,
thing. And it
mm,
also already works off this credibility that we build up in the first part and
mm.
helps make that critique more credible in the eyes of your audience.
Yeah.
So a win-win overall. And then
Yeah.
finally, to touch on the educational campaigns, the bottom line was that educational campaigns matter. 90% of my participants, and sometimes even more, said that they think it is very crucial that voters are
Mm,
educated in this
mm,
neutral manner. Because
mm,
we get so much, tagging between different sides on vote for me, no, vote for me, I'm the best, no, I'm the best, that a lot of times people might lose sight of why voting in itself is actually important. So it's
mm,
very good to have those neutral third parties
mm,
putting out campaigns like Get Out the Vote that help just educate voters in general, just help them understand why their vote matters, and then help them make an educated decision about who exactly to vote for. And another finding was that to make this more practical, it's important to make voting more accessible overall. So that includes some actions like putting out those voting booths on university campuses and in workplaces because that's where a big concentration of voters is, and that's where a lot of times they miss out on voting because they are in class, at work, and then they cannot get to the voting booth in time or things like that. So
mm,
meeting people where they are is really crucial here. It would help
mm,
increase the voter engagement significantly.
mm,
And then, of course, increasing the overall education around the issues
mm,
to highlight how important it is because the
mm,
democracy won't function unless people go out and vote
mm.
for the candidates they want to
Yeah.
support. The most specific, actionable insights that I gathered from this study, and my hope is that they could help create better campaigns, better advertisements that
Yeah.
would be both more ethical
Yeah.
and more effective, and
Mm,
overall help us boost the voter engagement in Canada.
yeah. Yeah. You raise very interesting point that negative message may generate some attention, some reaction,
Mhm.
but not necessarily generate a real engagement. Why political party focus so much their campaign on negative messaging?
Well, I would say that that is because it is mostly emotionally manipulative. So it
Mm,
is charged with a lot of emotion and it creates very strong feelings in the audience.
mm,
It helps sometimes sway voters. It is also dependent on the urban and suburban divide, and it is also dependent on the education level of the
mm,
participants. For
mm,
example, people who are currently at the stage of having completed high school diploma as their highest level of education, they tend to perceive those highly negative messages a bit better, and they see them as more favorable, they are more influential on those people. However, people who have the education of university degree and higher
mm,
usually tend to perceive positive advertisements as more favorable.
mm, mm,
But
mm.
overall, it's just because, negative ads, they generate a lot of attention, and a lot of parties employ this approach that no PR is bad PR. As long as people are talking about them, it creates some traction for them, which is
Yeah.
not necessarily always
Yeah.
good attention. So,
Yeah.
as we've
Yeah.
shown here.
Yeah, you're right. It could be effective if the people don't do their own research
Mm-hmm.
and learn more about the campaign and the platform of different parties. So I want to ask you this kind of follow-up question we just discussed. So during an election, voters can be overwhelmed by various type of political messaging, along with the serious issues of disinformation and misinformation. And you already mentioned the issue of ethics as well. So based on your research, what is your advice to voters?
Well, I would say that when you are flooded with political advertisements, you are bombarded from every side with these
Yeah.
messages of vote for me, no, vote for me. The
Yeah.
most important part is to stay aware of the emotional manipulation.
Yeah.
As we just discussed, 90% of advertisements out there are trying to play on your emotions.
Mm,
So it's really important to, when you see those messages and you start feeling different things about them, to ask
mm,
yourself,
mm.
what is this advertisement trying to make me feel?
Yeah.
What reaction will they benefit from? Why do they need it? And then when you recognize those emotional tactics that are employed to sway you in a certain direction, it is easier for you to feel empowered and to feel like you are making your own choice, not just
Yeah.
following someone else's lead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then another important thing is to always look for the facts.
Mm.
Choose wisely who you vote for, not just based on personal attachments and like feelings that arise from watching those kind of advertisements, but also based on the platform they're running on.
Mm.
Always check those facts. If they
Mm.
are saying that they are going to build X amount of new houses or create X amount of new jobs, you should go and look for their specific platform to see how exactly did they frame that in
Mm.
their strategic plan, how
Mm.
exactly are they going to achieve it.
Mm.
And then same applies for cases when they are talking about their achievements in an advertisement and they are talking about everything that they have done. It is
Mm.
always good to go and check if those achievements actually match the truth, if that is actually what happened, if they are not taken out of the context.
Mm.
And likewise, when they are criticizing the opposition and they are giving you certain facts and data about why the opposition is not a good choice, it is
Mm.
also advisable to go and check that information.
Mm.
And yes, I know that that creates more work because that requires some more research. You have to go and start searching those things up.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's really worth it in this context because
Mm.
ultimately you're making a very important choice here and you
Mm.
want to make sure that it is educated and that
Mm.
you base it on your own beliefs and on your own knowledge
Yeah.
because it's not always safe to trust those advertisements because while they might still communicate the actual facts, they might present them in a misleading manner or maybe take them out of context, and you just don't want to be frustrated later down the line when you find out that, oh, that's not actually what they meant. So it's better to come prepared,
Yeah.
get all the
That's
knowledge you can. And yeah,
very, very true. Thank you
yeah.
for this insight. Uh, Obviously, you have done a great project. As you know, the group projects are important component in business education. Daria, what is your advice to students on how to effectively collaborate on a group project?
Well, I would definitely say that it is important to start with a very clear definition of your goal and the scope of your project. What is the topic you're researching? Why are you doing it? What are the expectations from this project? You need to know what success looks like in order to achieve it. If everyone in the team has a different vision of what we are supposed to be doing, we are probably not going to do a very good job of that project.
That's true.
Then it is also important to set team rules. For example, you need to set expectations of for how much in advance someone needs to warn you if they are not able to make it to the team meeting, or if they are not able to meet an external deadline that you set for them, or if they need to cancel something. All those things need to be communicated beforehand because ultimately what I came to understand is that everyone has a very different work ethic, and what is okay for one person might not be okay for the other person.
Mm.
And that can lead to a lot of conflict and tension in your team, which you can ultimately avoid if just in the beginning you create your team rules, you set the expectations that everyone agrees with, and then everyone will just feel much more respected and like their time is really valued by their team members, which
Mm.
overall creates a nicer atmosphere in the team.
Mm.
And then you want to create a timeline right away of how you're going to be working on the project. What I think works really well is setting your own deadlines a couple days before the actual
Mm.
deadline to submit that part of the project.
Mm.
Because you might think that you are on track and everything is going well, but then there's always something that happens last minute.
Mm.
Someone couldn't submit their part because they got sick, something needs to be rewritten, new information surface that you need to include in your project. And then you don't want to be doing that at 4 a.m. when your submission is due at 8 a.m. Do not do that to yourself and just give yourself a grace period so that if you need to work on something, edit something, rework it, you have those couple of days to actually do that instead of working on it like the night before. And then overall, just communicate with your team members.
Yeah.
Communication is key. You need to clearly describe the task that you are working with. You need to clearly describe the feedback when you are giving it to each other. You need to communicate what is going well, what isn't, and just overall, make it easy as well for you to communicate with each other. So create your group chats in WhatsApp or whatever means of communication you prefer. Get on Zoom calls, to discuss your projects, to practice your presentations. Just make it easy and keep following up with each other. Don't talk, 2 times. One time in the beginning of the project and one time before the final submission. Like you should really have those little steps where you check in with each other because I feel like that not only helps you with the project, but it also helps you, build a good relationship with your colleagues along the way as well. You get to know them better, you get to understand their work styles better. Just
Mm.
in general, it makes the project more enjoyable when you feel like you are working with people that you know to an extent. So, yeah, all of that and just boils down to respecting each other's time and effort. Everyone is putting their best forward. That's what we hope. And, we're trying to help each other. We're trying to collaborate here and ultimately trying to learn something. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to, raise your hand and clarify an extra time something you don't understand. And then work collectively and figure those things out. And don't stress. I know that sometimes those projects are really stressful. I always stress about them. And then I have to be like, okay, it's okay. We'll figure it out. We have time. We have a good team. So don't stress and everything will work out.
I'll make all of my students watch that segment. Okay. What is next for you, Daria?
Well, right now I am working towards completing my degree in finance and economics, while also conducting some research in this field because I love doing research in general, as you can see. And then my next academic step is getting a master's degree to really deepen my knowledge in this aspect and build a solid foundation for my future work. And then alongside my studies, I'm also trying to gain as much hands-on experience as possible. So I work in marketing, investments, and I try to use all of those opportunities to help me develop an actual solid skill set of those hard skills as well. And then combining them with the knowledge that I gained from my academic career, I'm hoping to get this overall very well-rounded understanding and well-rounded capacity to do things. And my long-term goal, one of them, is to open my own career coaching and consulting practices where I can blend all of this knowledge and I can apply all of this financial insights, people first leadership, and overall strategic thinking to help people. And while doing all of this, I try to stay involved in the community as well. So I lead the UFE Economic Student Association starting this summer. Then I also work with a mental health organization called Healthy Minds, Healthy Campuses, and a support student refugee program from the World University Services of Canada. So overall, I'm just really trying to combine strong academic foundation with some real world experience while keeping it all community centered and having this community focused mindset to really create some impact and some change that will matter to not only me but also other people and hopefully influence and help improve other people's lives as well.
Thank you for your time, Daria, and best wishes on completing your business degree and future endeavors.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here and I was really glad to share my project, and yeah, thank you so much for doing this series.